So it is 5:30. I'm going to get started and we'll have more folks joining this webinar as they have time to get on. My name is Kirk Acharya. I'm the program coordinator for CAKE CISMA. That's the Charlevoix, Antrim, Kalkaska, and Emmett County Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. And before we get started with our My Paddle Stewards training tonight, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. And this is a great practice, especially with the area that we live in and the work that we do as conservation professionals. I want to acknowledge the land that we're meeting on and that we all paddle on as traditional territory of the Anishinaabe tribal nations, ceded under the Treaty of Washington, signed in 1836. I'd also like to acknowledge the tribal governments and their groups that are in their roles today in taking care of the lands we're on. With that, I would like to give everyone a warm welcome to the 2021 virtual training for My Paddle Stewards. This is a very exciting event for all of us. It's a great week filled with this virtual training. Many of you may have already looked at the My Paddle Stewards online class and had a chance to look at that too. And we'll also have 3 paddle events that I'll talk about in a moment. I'd like to acknowledge all of our hosting partners in Northwest Michigan. Besides CAKE CISMA, we also a big warm thank you to Paddle Antrim for doing a lot of the organization and working with many of the paddlers in the area and also putting this event together for us. Kalkaska Conservation District, which will be hosting the Paddle of the Torch River. Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council, which will be hosting the Crooked River Paddle, and Walloon Lake Association Conservancy hosting the Walloon Lake Paddle. And then finally, our partners at Sea Grant, Michigan and My Paddle Stewards that put together some of this content for us and also act as a great resource for paddlers around the state of Michigan. A brief rundown on the schedule of events for this week beyond this virtual training. We have 3 different paddles planned for you all, which are very exciting. So the first is going to be tomorrow, July 28th, 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. at Crooked River, hosted by Tip of the Mitt. The next will be in the morning of the 29th at Torch River, hosted by Kalkaska Conservation District. And then our final paddle will be July 30th in the morning from 9 to 11 at Walloon Lake. We ask that all paddlers bring their own craft, if it be a kayak, canoe, or paddleboard. And please remind you to always wear a life jacket while out in the water. And so we're looking forward to seeing you at one of those events. For our discussion this evening, a couple of things that we'll go over. I'll first start with a My Paddle Stewards overview from our partners at Michigan Sea Grant. And that is a short video from them. And then also I'll talk through some of the common invasives of Northwest Michigan, what you can do to identify them, and things that we can learn about how they impact the ecosystems around Northwest Michigan. Then we'll also talk about some things that what you can do to help as paddlers, and there'll be plenty of time for questions and discussions at the end there. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. As I am speaking, I'll be happy to pause and answer anything as it comes up, or if you'd like to hold those till the end, we will have plenty of time to talk without mute. So I'm going to start us off with a short 15-minute video from Mary Bowling, who is the lead instructor at the Sea Grant My Paddle Stewards program. So please enjoy.
Hello and welcome to the My Paddle. My name is Mary Bowling, and I'm an educator with MSU Extension for the Michigan Sea Grant program. We're so glad that you chose to take this course and look forward to having you join the ranks of citizen scientists across the Great Lakes who are working to help prevent and slow the spread of aquatic invasive species throughout our lakes, rivers, and streams. In this unit, I will be defining what an invasive species is, the problems we see with them, how they get here, how they spread, And finally, more information about the Paddle Stewards program, including the objective, goals, and a brief overview of what you can expect in our upcoming units. So first, let's start with what is an invasive species? There are lots of definitions out there, but the one that we like to use is from Executive Order 13112, which states that an invasive species is any plant, animal, and other organism that is, one, not native to the ecosystem, and two, if introduced to that ecosystem, it causes harm or is likely to cause harm to the economy, environment, and/or human health. So for the purposes of this course, we will be focusing on aquatic species, although some of the units will touch on resources for terrestrial species as well. So why are invasive species a problem? Well, they upset the balance of nature by disrupting native species. Because they don't have any natural predators, invasive species can reproduce and spread rapidly. And again, they are a threat to the economy, recreation, human health, and safety. After habitat alteration by humans, invasive species are the most prevalent threat to biodiversity loss. They hinder economic development and can be hosts for diseases. Species such as invasive Phragmites can block watershed views and access, decreasing the aesthetic value of nature and preventing recreational opportunities. To date, there are about 180 non-native aquatic species in the Great Lakes. Not all of them are doing harm though. So those that are not doing harm or likely to do no harm are not considered invasives by the definition that we covered earlier. In this case, they're simply considered non-native. Aquatic non-native and invasive species arrive in the Great Lakes through a variety of channels. Many traveled across the ocean in ballast water carried by freighters. Others were released intentionally or accidentally after being brought to the region for bait, gardening, aquaculture, ornamental fish ponds, or pets. Some have entered from the ocean through human-built channels such as the Welland Canal. Here's a graph prepared by my colleague at the NOAA Great Lakes Environmental Research Lab that shows the method of introduction through time from 1837 to 2017. I'd like to draw your attention to the right-hand side of the graph at 2017 because this is an accumulation of all the introduction pathways since 1837. You see that ballast water in red on the bottom has been the most common introduction pathway since 1837, with planted, stocked second in bright orange in the middle of the graph. However, we've gotten a good handle on these two pathways through changing policies and procedures. So today, pathways such as aquarium, escaped culture, bait increases, and recreational boating are more common. Another thing to point out is that the rate of new introductions in 2007 to 2017 has drastically decreased to about 0.1 per year, a rate that we haven't seen since 1847 to 1857. Prior to 2007, the rate of introduction was about 1.9 new species each year. And here is a heat map showing the distribution of invasive species by watersheds across the Great Lakes Basin. Note that the deeper the red color on the map, the higher the number of invasive species there are in those watersheds. However, it's also important to note that places with the same color don't mean that they have the exact same species in them. For example, the number of invasive species in Lake Ontario and Lake Michigan is in the 80 to 129 range, but the species are different in each one of those lakes. Knowing common ways that invasive species are introduced and how they move around the landscape can help us detect new invasive species before they have a chance to become well established. This graph shows that the earlier we can detect a species, the less area it can expand to and the lower cost of addressing the problem. Prior to a species being found in an area, our focus should be on prevention. However, once a species is detected, there's a small window of opportunity for eradication or eliminating it from the area. We call that window with prevention and eradication EDRR, or early detection and rapid response. Once there is a rapid increase in distribution and abundance, the focus has to shift to containing it in that area and not allowing it to be spread to new areas. After they are widespread, the focus is on long-term control and the costs go way up. This is why it is important to identify the species early before it has time to spread and become established. That's where the My Paddle Stewards program and you come in. In the rest of this unit, I will talk about My Paddle Stewards program, our objectives and goals, and as well as an overview of what the future units will cover. We all know that motorized boats are not the only form of watercraft that is spreading invasive species throughout our water bodies. Our objective is simple: to prevent the spread of invasive species in Michigan through boater education and awareness. We designed this program specifically for non-motorized boaters with 3 goals in mind. 1, change your equipment cleaning behavior where needed. 2, to increase your knowledge of aquatic invasive species. And 3, encourage you to share that information with others. Our goals for all of you are that you download and use the MISIN app, which we'll explain later, to check for and report species in your area, that you help distribute My Paddle Steward program materials that you'll be receiving in a toolkit that we'll also explain later, and that you help educate others about what you have learned. So throughout the Great Lakes, kayaking, paddleboarding, and canoeing have become an increasingly popular way to enjoy our beautiful waterways. As these sports grow, we have an opportunity to recruit citizen scientists who share the same passion for protecting our waters. The My Paddle Stewards program was created to educate paddlers on how to be responsible for their watercraft and do their part to assist with early detection and rapid response. The program is funded through the Michigan Invasive Species Grant Program in partnership with many organizations throughout the state. In 2019, we held a series of in-person workshops with the help of at least 1 local organization at each workshop. These organizations continue to help us with this online format and other program components. Once you complete this online course, you will join the ranks of 162 other citizen scientists who were trained in 2019. Now that you have learned how to define an invasive species and why it's important to identify and report them, the rest of the course will provide details about Michigan watch list species, the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network reporting system, my Clean Boats, Clean Waters program. You can view a cleaning demonstration and learn about resources to help you as a newly trained My Paddle Steward. There are also a few optional videos and documents to review if you choose to. In Unit 2, we'll focus on the Michigan watch list species because these are the ones that pose an immediate threat to Michigan's economy, environment, and/or human health. They have either never been confirmed or have limited numbers here in Michigan. So we have that best chance of implementing a successful early detection and rapid response. Unit 2 covers this in a lot of detail. Here's an example of what's covered in the watch list unit. We include a photo of each of the watch list species with distinguishing characteristics, information about the native range, date of introduction in North America, high-risk pathways, Michigan legal status. In this case, it's a prohibited, meaning that it's illegal to possess or sell European frogbit. We talk about the known Michigan locations, if there are any, and any native lookalikes. Unit 3 will cover the MISIN reporting system. Again, MISIN stands for Midwest Invasive Species Information Network. We include information on the desktop version as well as your choice of mobile platforms for Android and iPhones. MISIN can be used for watch list species as well as any other invasive species, both aquatic and terrestrial. We walk through screenshots of each version, answer questions about how to identify and record the invasive species, and talk about what happens after a report is submitted. In addition to using MISIN for reporting, we share information about other info that's available through the desktop version, and that includes alerts that you can sign up for. When someone adds a report for a species or in a geography that you are interested in, here's an example of the email that you get once you sign up for an alert and somebody reports something in your area. You can also get detailed species information through the MISIN app. And you can take optional training modules for a lot of different species that are out there. Unit 4 is all about the Michigan Clean Boats, Clean Waters program. Info with a focus on prevention. It is simple and inexpensive to clean, drain, dry, and dispose. We discuss how research shows most boaters are aware of invasive species, but don't know proper ways to clean their equipment to prevent its spread. You may recall from the invasion curve I showed earlier that prevention is much easier and less expensive than eradication, containment, and long-term maintenance of an invasive species. So this unit focuses on 4 steps that should be communicated to every boater. It can inspect and remove any visible mud, plants, or animals before transporting equipment. 2 is to drain the water from the equipment before they transport it elsewhere. 3, dispose of unwanted bait in the trash, not in the water. 4, spray, rinse, or dry equipment to remove and kill invasive species. Dry it for several days if possible. I realize that this is a bit of a repeat, but we have to have all of us speaking with that same simple, consistent messaging everywhere, and that will give us the greatest impact. The final part of the Michigan Clean Boats, Clean Waters unit is a boat cleaning demonstration video specifically geared towards non-motorized vessels. And finally, Unit 5 will provide you with contact information for groups working on invasive species. The resource lists are split into 6 different regions so that you can select the one that is most relevant to you. And after completing this online course, we will mail each of you a toolkit filled with materials to help you be better stewards and encourage others to do so as well. We'll include extra copies of printed materials and boat floats for you to give away to others, as well as tools for your own use in cleaning your vessel and reporting, including a kayak hat, dry bag, waterproof phone case, drying towel, and spray bottle with instructions on how to mix your own cleaning solution. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you. We're looking forward to you participating in our program. And here's my email in case anyone is interested in contacting me for more information.
Awesome. Well, big thank you to Mary Bowling from the Michigan Sea Grant. And now we're going to move on to talking about some of those invasive species that Mary was just discussing that we look for as local land managers. And while I won't have a chance to touch on all of the plants that we have around Northwest Michigan, I'm going to touch on 6 that are very high priority for us as the local invasive species management organization, and ones that most of you will likely encounter as paddlers and can keep your eye out for and help report them to inform management goals across the whole region. So the 6 plants are Phragmites, purple loosestrife, New Zealand mud snail, Eurasian water milfoil, European frogbit, and Hydrilla. So I'm going to go through each one, talk about some of the defining characteristics and how to identify them, and then I'll talk about what you can do to help local land managers while you're out playing on the water. Phragmites, the scientific name is Phragmites australis, is a perennial grass that ranges in height from 6 to 13 feet. And one of the immediate characteristics that lets us know what kind of Phragmites plant it is, if it's native or invasive, is just the sheer size and density of these grass stands that you'll often see at edges of lakes or rivers or even upland. So they're usually a very dense monoculture, and the seed heads, if you look at the picture in the top left there, they're these very bushy, fluffy seed heads at the top of those tall grasses. And so the seed head, also those are the flowers called an inflorescence, is a dense branch cluster, and their stems are often dull yellowish, and they're covered by a leaf at the base there. And so that's an important characteristic that we'll talk about in a moment. The habitat that Phragmites often lives in are wetlands, stream, rivers, lake shores, but they can even exist in ditches and depressions that might have low levels of water depending on the year. And they can tolerate lots of nutrients from fertilizer runoff from lawns or even road salts. So they're very good invasive species in terms of existing all over the place in many different areas. And they reproduce by spreading rhizomes, which are the underground plant structures, as well as by fragmentation, so small pieces breaking off and regrowing, or seeds that are able to be wind dispersed. And the best time to survey these is actually year round. They can be distinguished even in the winter. Those, the dead stalks of the grasses are very easy to spot when you're driving or even snowshoeing by in the winter, but also easy in the summertime as you're paddling through many of the waterways. So the leaf sheath that I talked about earlier is the leaf at the very base. And if you look in the picture in the top right, that's an example of what I'm talking about, of that leaf right at the base. And so we can distinguish invasive Phragmites from native Phragmites because the native Phragmites will not have that leaf sheath at the bottom, and it's going to actually be exposed. And the color is very different on the native. It's almost a reddish chestnut color versus that dull yellowish on the invasive Phragmites. The next plant is purple loosestrife, Lythrum salicaria, which is an herbaceous wetland perennial plant. It usually is about 1.5 to 5 feet even in height. And the leaves, if you look at the picture on the far right, are very distinct. They're what are called lanceolate or spear-shaped leaves, and they are opposite or in whorls or combinations of 3 on the stem at the same height. And so that's a good indicator when you're looking at a plant and you see purple flowers but aren't sure. Those leaves are a good giveaway to identify purple loosestrife. And now, this is a plant that we have lots of projects treating on, especially in the chain of lakes, because it can take over large areas, become a monoculture, as you see in the very bottom picture there. Similar to Phragmites, it outcompetes a lot of those native plants. And so we're really trying to actively manage this plant and always welcome help in surveying for it. And so the habitat that purple loosestrife lives on are moist soils, wet meadows, and even prairies. But those shallow marshes, ditches, or areas along lakes, ponds, and stream banks are great places that it can grow. And it reproduces through many seeds that it creates. And those are dispersed through the water by birds, waterfowl, and also in soil that's picked up in your gear if you're fishing or wading, or even in your water shoes as you're getting in and out of your paddle craft. The best time to survey for purple loosestrife is actually right now, and hopefully we'll see some of that in the on the water paddle sessions. It's in bloom from July to September. And the native loosestrife has single flowers. So instead of that combination of 3 flowers you see at the top, there will only be 1. And it can be distinguished by those 5 to 7 petals in the purple flowers there. So a good invasive to look out for on the water. The next plant, or next animal, pardon me, we'll discuss is the New Zealand mud snail, Potamopyrgus antipodarum. It's a mouthful and I'm still working on my Latin. These are very tiny snails and are actually becoming a big priority for our local organizations. This invasive species can impact the food chain of many prize sport fish and also can change a lot of the dynamics for the macroinvertebrates in a stream. And the reason that we are focused on this so much lately is because it hasn't been really surveyed for in our service region in the 4 counties of Northwest Michigan. It's been found in the Boardman River just to the south of us, as well as the Ausable River. But identifying the New Zealand mud snail, it's very small. It's only on average 1/8 of an inch long, and they can be identified by their whorls. There are 7 to 8, and those whorls are the bands on the shells. There's around 7 to 8 of them. And then one of the good defining characteristics when you find some of these tiny snails when you are out paddling and maybe pick them up on a paddle or on a craft is that they're right hand opening. So that means when you hold a snail in your hand and you point that sharp tipped point of the shell away from you, that opening is going to be on the right side of the shell instead of the left. So often native snails open on the left side, and it's just one characteristic that helps us in identifying these. And so they're obviously native to New Zealand, and they're found there in flowing freshwater areas with silty, sandy sediments, even to brackish rivers. But they can exist in depths up to 60 feet in freshwater lakes or reservoirs. And so it's very important that we keep an eye on these as they are moving in and out of different waterways. And they're self-reproducing. So females make up to 95% of that population that can actually reproduce without a male. And just one female of these tiny snails can make up to 230 juveniles per year. So even if you have one attached to a paddle and you take that somewhere new, unfortunately it can create a whole new self-sustaining population. And so they spread via that mud, sediment, or any debris that gets onto your waders, onto your boat or gear. And so surveying during the summer along river edges is something that many of our local partners are doing. And as you are going in and out of the water while paddling, it's just important to keep an eye out and be vigilant in taking some of those decontamination steps that Mary discussed earlier, and we will touch on in a moment. Moving on with plants, we next have Eurasian water milfoil. This is Myriophyllum spicatum, and this is a submergent aquatic perennial plant that grows in these dense mats, and they're often floating on the top of the water parallel with the surface. And so they also have what are called whorled leaves, but the leaves are what are called pinnate, so they almost look like they're feathered instead of one single broad leaf on each stem. And those leaves have about 12 to 20 fine segments on each of them. And you'll often see them, like in this picture on the bottom, forming these big dense mats around areas of slow or stagnant ponds, and any low energy zones in rivers in depths of up to 3 to 12 feet. So they can make recreation very difficult to paddle through or get in and out. You can get your paddle stuck on them. So something to watch out for and make sure that you're reporting if you see it out on the water. These spread by fragmentation and runners. And so that means that even if you get a small piece of water milfoil on a paddle and take it somewhere new, that little fragment can also vegetate and grow. So it's dispersed by boats and even taken downstream by currents. And the best time to survey is through the growing season. So at this point in the summer, everything is usually leafed out and in full bloom. And they can be distinguished by those 12 to 20 leaflets in each of those stems. The next priority invasive plant that we look for in aquatic habitats is European frogbit. Hopefully something you won't encounter, as it's usually in very shallow water. And this is the Hydrocharis morris renee. It's an aquatic floating herbaceous annual plant. And these have long cord-like what are called stolons, which is the stem connecting those leaves to the sediments in the river or lake that they're growing in. And these kidney-shaped leaves resemble water lilies, but they're very tiny, so they're only about 1/2 inch to 2 inches wide. And then they have very distinct flowers, these white 3-petaled flowers with the yellow base, blooming in midsummer. And so they'll, as I said, they grow in open, still waters, very often lakes, ponds, or even shallow ditches or sheltered edges of moving water. And so they reproduce by these vegetative buds off the side of their stems, and they can spread rapidly there, being dispersed by boats or even just by current. And the best time to survey for these is again in summer and fall, as those little leaves can often keep their greenness throughout the fall into the later months of the summer. And our final plant is Hydrilla verticillata. And this is a submergent plant, so it grows again in these big dense mats. It's a perennial plant, and it can grow down to about 20 feet down. And it will form these big mats right around boat launches or any of these high traffic areas, especially ones where you have lots of input of nutrients, if that's from lawn fertilization or any sort of spray that's putting in lots of nutrients into the waterway. And so the upper leaves on the plant are in these whorls of 4 leaves along the stem. You can see some nice pictures in the top there. And the leaves on their margin or the edge of the leaf are serrated, so they look like a very fine bread knife almost. And then the midribs, which is that little line that goes along the center of the leaf, can be reddish in some of the dioecious plants, which are the male-female plants. And so their habitat is, again, in those slow-moving waters or lakes, streams or rivers, and they can really tolerate a lot of different water qualities, which makes them a really good competitor with some of our native aquatic plants. They spread by fragments again, so it's that same issue we saw with some of those previous plants, where if a tiny piece gets onto your kayak, canoe, paddle, even your life jacket, that plant can travel with you and establish itself in a new waterway. And it can also hitch a ride on ducks or geese that are coming in and out of that area. The best time to survey for Hydrilla is in the late spring, really through the growing season in summer or fall too. And those whorls of 4 to 8 leaves per node on the stem, like you can see in that top picture, are a good distinguishing feature from them, aside from some of the native species that we have that do not have that serrated edge of the leaf. And so quickly to recap some of these problem plants and animals that we've just discussed, Phragmites, the very tall reed-like grass that you'll see in many places. This was brought over to the United States and has become a very big issue, especially when we have it on shorelines. It can limit access for boaters, paddlers, but even if it's near roads, it can impact visibility because it gets so tall and dense. Purple loosestrife, a shorter flowering plant that, again, can take over and outcompete a lot of those native plants. New Zealand mud snail, which is a very tiny snail from the area down under or just next door. And that can really change the food web makeup of a lot of these streams and can impact fish populations. It's something we're actively searching for and surveying with all of our local partners. Eurasian water milfoil, forming these dense mats on top of waterways. European frogbit in those slow-moving areas with the very tiny lily pad looking like leaves. And then finally Hydrilla, which can be a submergent plant forming these big mats, often at boat launches or areas with high nutrient inputs or runoff from fertilization into the water. And so, learning all of these characteristics, what can you do to help prevent the spread of some of these priority plants as both a paddler and just a member of the community in Northern Michigan if you're here living full-time or just visiting for a short time? Those 3 things are first, clean, drain, dry, and dispose. So this is something we'll talk about. That includes decontaminating your boat and gear in between paddles, so when you're going in and out of different areas. The second is reporting invasive species, if that's either to us here at CAKE CISMA doing invasive plant management, or via what's called the MISIN mobile app that Mary talked about. This is a citizen science app, and I'll discuss how to use that in a moment. And then finally, if you are a homeowner doing any gardening, planting native plants to really promote native biodiversity in our ecosystems of both plants and animals and wildlife. If you own a home on shoreline anywhere, using shoreline best practices, and always working with trusted nurseries or landscapers if you are contracting out any of that. So the first item on our list is clean, drain, dry, and dispose. I'm going to play a very short video here on how to do that. And also during our on the water paddles, we'll have Dina from Paddle Antrim talk about actually how to do this in person. So please enjoy.
Paddle sports are rapidly becoming some of the most popular recreational activities in Michigan. However, invasive organisms can be accidentally spread by unsuspecting paddlers. These aquatic invasive species disrupt ecosystems, interfere with recreation opportunities, and can even damage paddlecraft and equipment. Paddlers play a critical role in helping to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species. After every paddle, just practice these 4 simple steps: clean, drain, dry, and dispose. First, remove your paddlecraft and gear from the water. When possible, avoid exiting through areas with thick aquatic vegetation. Bring your equipment away from the water's edge and remove all plants, mud, and debris from your hull, rudder, paddle, and any other gear. Depending on the type of craft that you are cleaning, you may have to flip the craft to remove water or vegetation from the topside or inside of the craft. With all of the water out of the craft and all of the obvious debris removed from the outside, spray the craft surfaces with a bleach or vinegar solution, 1 part bleach to 10 parts water, or 1 part vinegar to 1 part water, and rub down with a clean rag. Thoroughly clean and dry anything that comes into contact with the water, including roof racks and trailers. Finally, dispose of any resulting material on dry land away from the water's edge. These few simple steps make a big difference in the health and enjoyment of our waterways. To learn more, visit the following online resources, and happy paddling.
Okay. Well, that was a great video and leads us into our next thing you can do after making sure we're taking those steps to clean, drain, dry, and dispose. The next step in helping us as paddlers is really contributing to local conservation where you are. And one of those ways is reporting invasive species through the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network. And so what MISIN is a collaboration between the DNR, the Department of Agriculture, the Environment and Great Lakes Energy Department, and Michigan State University to create a citizen science, community-driven database of reporting invasive plants. And by you participating in this, it helps to inform our decisions as land managers and as conservation agencies to make sure that we're catching all of these invasive plants and trying to come up with long-term sustainable solutions to really help promote native biodiversity and encourage that wildlife and plant life that we all enjoy about Northern Michigan. And so I'm going to quickly run through how to use this, and there will also be a chance to put it into practice out on the water. And so to install the MISIN app on a cell phone or a tablet, you can go to your app store if it's Google or Apple and search MISIN and install that, giving it the ability to access photos that you take of the plants that you're uploading, and then also using your location so that we know exactly where that plant was found based on your GPS. And this is an incredibly powerful tool for local conservation agencies, again, to make those decisions on where we're putting our time and resources to help conserve Northern Michigan. So once you have this downloaded onto a device, registering for an account, it's a fairly easy setup. It only takes you 1 or 2 minutes to create your password and username, and none of this information is shared with anyone. It's simply to keep track of what you have reported yourself. And once you log on there on the right, you see a home screen with a couple of buttons that will walk through how to actually look up plant information and report those. So getting started on that home screen, if you're looking at a plant and you want to try to figure out more information or learn more, you can select plants and hit go. This will take you to a screen that has what are called the habits, or what type of forms those plants come in. So many of the things that we've talked about were aquatic plants, some grasses, or even herbs for purple loosestrife. And so clicking on one of those can take you and narrow it down to what types of species you're looking at. So browsing by species, you can select one and get some details. So you can browse on species information, or you can report a sighting using that red button. And we'll talk about first how to browse through that species information and then move on to reporting a sighting. To learn a little bit more about a species, once you've clicked on it, you can use any of those gray buttons in the bottom to look at photos of it, or a map of where it's been found. This is very handy if you're questioning something and say, oh, I don't know if this is the right plant. If it hasn't been found at all near you, then maybe that's a good indicator that it's a different plant that we're trying to identify. Or if it's something that's very common, then you can probably be sure that you were spot on in your identification. And then once we've decided on a correct identification, sometimes this app doesn't have all the information you need. And so if that is looking to a good trusted field guide, maybe a friend who's very good at plant identification, or even using other phone applications such as iNaturalist that help to identify plants, can be a good way of going about that. So to report observations, we would go back to that screen and click on that red report presence button, and that will bring us to a screen in the middle that'll let you add comments, photos of that plant that you've seen, as well as your location, and then you'll click that save button in the top right, and your observation will be saved on to your device and your account. But that's not the last step. To make sure that you have submitted the data up to Michigan State and to all the local land managers, once you're off the water paddling and back to Wi-Fi or cell service, on the home screen, you'll click the big red send data button on the home screen. And this will package up all of your plant observations, and they'll send them off to those local land managers so that we can start taking that information and actually putting it to use in the field as we're planning restoration of sites or invasive species management work. So with that, I'd like to just acknowledge the MISIN staff and Michigan State University staff, Amos Ziegler and Claire Peterson, Claire that put some of these slides together, as well as partners that are part of MISIN, including Michigan State, Michigan Natural Features Inventory, the DNR, EAGLE, and the Michigan Department of Agriculture. If you're interested in downloading that MISIN app and helping us, more information can be found at misin.msu.edu. There are also some great training modules on their website for different common invasive plants on how to make sure you understand all of those characteristics and practice up before you get out and help us survey for invasive plants on your own time. And the third and final way that you can help us in preventing the spread of invasive species is if you are a homeowner, again, planting native plants and using shoreline best practices. And so what I mean by those are illustrated in this diagram on the top. Looking at a shoreline in cross section, we think about really reducing those hard surfaces, so concrete slabs or asphalt that do not let water penetrate down in the soil to be processed by all the little microorganisms before it goes into the lake. Also reducing our use of chemical and fertilizers in our homes is also very important. Maintaining a septic system And one of the big ones, unfortunately, is minimizing your lawn, making sure that you don't have a big, huge green lawn that goes up to the water where we're constantly putting fertilizer down, which ends up running right into the water system. Making sure that we're using soft shoreline practices, so planting native plants that can help process a lot of those nutrients and any pollutants that are going in, and really improving the native biodiversity to help stabilize a shoreline and protect wildlife habitat. The second thing is making sure we're planting native plants. We have a great partner, our sister CISMA in the Traverse City area is the Invasive Species Network, and they have a statewide program called Go Beyond Beauty, but they're really focused on Northern Michigan, and they're working with local nurseries, tree farms, and landscapers to actually make sure that we have some great information and resources on companies that are focused on native plants and native biodiversity. And so I would encourage you to go check out their Go Beyond Beauty program the next time you're planning any sort of gardening project or landscaping. There's even some interesting projects where they have trade up days. So an example is Japanese barberry, which is a very common ornamental shrub, but it's very invasive and can take over native and natural spaces. ISN and the Go Beyond Beauty program will actually take your Japanese barberry to dispose of and swap it for a beautiful native shrub that is not only going to give you that aesthetic enjoyment, but provide habitat for a lot of the native wildlife and other plants that can rely on it. So with that, I want to encourage you all to stay updated. All of our partners are on Facebook and Instagram, and you can keep up to date on different projects and learn more about invasive plants. For more specifics on our organization, CAKE CISMA, I'd encourage you to go to cakecisma.org and also be a part of our ongoing projects in the region. I'd also like to say a big thank you to all of our hosting partners, so Kalkaska Conservation District, Paddle Antrim, Sea Grant, Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council, and Walloon Lake Association Conservancy. And a thank you to you. This was a wonderful training and something that we're all very excited to put on. We're looking forward to seeing those of you on the water that can join us. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions, either in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. Thank you. And I'm going to ask Dina to monitor the chat for me here if we have any questions there.
Sounds good, as long as they send it to everybody.
We have a question from Richard. Any financial support for purple loosestrife? Richard, at the moment, there is for individual landowners. CAKE CISMA and through grants from the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians has the ability to treat in 2021, and that project is underway at the moment. With lake associations or larger groups, we do a very reasonable cost share for that as well. And that's something to check in with CAKE CISMA about and get more information on. Thank you. Great. Any other questions? Great question on reporting invasive species, but not removing them. While we do ask a lot of paddlers and the community members to report invasive species, the reason we don't ask folks to remove them themselves is often they're invasive species that can spread or grow even more after being pulled up or cut. And so understanding the biology of the invasive species and making sure that we're taking the right steps to improve that native biodiversity is very important, and something that we encourage you to contact your local CISMA to know the best way to remove an invasive species before taking that step yourself. And that's something we're always happy to discuss and provide more resources on. Great question, thank you.
I would also like to add that it's always best to make sure that you're 100% certain on what you're what you think may be an invasive species. So that's generally why we try and also not to encourage that, is because there have been instances, where someone thinks that they're out there doing the right thing by pulling an invasive when it turns out it's not invasive. So just one more thing to watch out for.
Thank you, Lauren from Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council. A great example of that is pitcher's thistle, which is a federally endangered plant that we have in northern Michigan on dunes. To some eyes, it can look very similar to spotted knapweed, which is a prolific invasive plant. And so making sure that we have that identification spot on is important before doing any sort of treatment, if that's pulling or digging plants or applying herbicide. Absolutely. Thank you for that question.